Hello, this is Tamera Weeks. Welcome to Tam's Daily Vlog. Today is Family Life with Cerebral Palsy Series number 4, and we are still talking about those early years when we still lived in Houston, Texas. And I had a few stories that I remember from back then that I thought I would share with you. One is, I know I told you how much that Micah cried. I promise that is really my real memory of all those early years. It just seemed like it was never ending. Micah didn't sleep very well. So you hear all these stories about put your kid in the car seat in the car and drive around town, and that never really made Micah go to sleep. So I heard stories about putting your baby on top of the dryer. So one time that actually worked for about 20 minutes, and I was pretty excited. But that was the only time I made the dryer thing work. So we got one of those things, I don't remember what they called them, but they clamp in the door frames. And you put your baby in it, and they can bounce up and down in it. It was a big old giant spring that they were on. We got one of those, and if it would have cost $1,000, it would have been worth $1,000. I remember putting Micah in that, and I just had bills and paperwork and all the stuff that you have to take care of for daily life just laying everywhere, and I would grab it all together and attempt to get bills paid on time, and I would put her in that bouncer. I remember that I used to do that a lot. William would come home, and he would put Micah on his knee, and he would hold on to her, and he'd bounce his knee up and down, and Micah would grin, and he'd stop, and she'd start crying. So he'd bounce, and she'd grin, and she'd laugh, and she'd be happy, and he'd stop, and she'd start crying all over again. We used to do that. Micah had a walker. They no longer make these walkers because they deemed them to be unsafe, and I was so young and inexperienced, I didn't know that if Micah fell over in her walker that was considered unsafe. I just thought that it was an accident. I'd just pick her up and let her keep walking, and it was no big deal to me. But what was really cool when she was very, very young, she must have been, I don't know, maybe she was 3. We had a neighbor next door, Kathy. And Micah understood enough to know who that was when I talked about her. She knew where she lived, and I would put Micah in her walker, and I'd say, go see Kathy, and she would get in there, and she would walk, and she would fall over in her walker, and I'd pick her up, and she'd keep going, and I would just watch her go. She would go all by herself. She did that just a few times. But that was really cool to me that Micah could understand what I was saying, and she could do something like that by herself. There was another time we were going to a Christmas banquet for church. The only thing I remember, I don't remember the banquet, but I was very focused, and when I have my mind on something, I don't think about anything else. I just really focus on what it is that I'm doing. So I must have really been focused on getting there. I must have been doing something. So I was just thinking about it, and if I remember right, we had a couple of Vienna kids with us. And we get in the van. I remember it was raining just a little bit. I was wearing a green taffeta dress from my friend Carolyn from her wedding. She'd gotten married a few years before, and we had Micah and Lauren both by this time. And I remember years ago when you were in a wedding, you would get those shoes, those pumps, and they would dye them to match your dress. So I remember that night I ruined those shoes in the wet grass, because they were dyed, and so it had the watermark all around the shoe. So I remember that, and I remember us getting in the whatever vehicle we had, and we were leaving, and we're driving down the road, and somebody said something about Micah, and I'm like, oh, where's Micah? Micah was, and I remember, she was in her room in the back of the house in that unsafe walker in the dark, no lights, no nothing, because we closed up the house. We were gone for the night. And I thought, man, what kind of mother forgets to take her kid with her? But we were just really busy. I don't know. We were just, everybody was getting in the car. I have a lot of I left my kids somewhere stories, but we're just talking about Micah today. And so anyway, those are a few of the stories that I remember about Micah. So just catching you up just a little bit.